All right, thank you, Robbie. We'll go ahead and get started then. The regular meeting of TAC Funding and Programming on May 16th, starting just a little bit after 1 o'clock. First, we will start by seeing if there are any changes to the agenda. So does staff or any of the members have any changes to the agenda? Right, seeing none, we will move on to approval of the April 18th minutes of the committee. Any discussion?
Elaine Koutsoukas makes a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Elaine. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
This is Jason from Hennepin County. I'll second.
Thank you, Jason. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we will go to roll call. Robert?
Thank you, Chair. Anoka County, OJ.
Robbie, this is Jerry. I abstain from the approval of the minutes, but I am present. Thanks. I wasn't at the last meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Carver County, Mielke. Dakota County, Fabish. Hennepin County, Piper.
Aye.
Scott County, Jessen. Washington County, Dahlheimer.
Aye.
Bloomington, Kiel. Eden Prairie, Ellis. Fridley, Kozlucher.
Aye.
Lakeville, Omi.
Aye.
Minneapolis, Coster.
Aye.
Plymouth, Chair Thompson.
Aye.
St. Paul Engineering, Weber. Metro Transit, Jenowiak.
Aye.
Suburban Transit, Fighton. Or Scholl.
Aye.
That's Scholl.
Correct.
DNR, Spooner, Walsh.
Aye.
MnDOT Bike Ped, Mike Samuelson. MnDOT Metro District, Tag. MnDOT State Aid, Brown.
Aye.
MPCA,
Lauren Dickerson is here on his behalf.
excellent, welcome. And what was your vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Met Council, MTS, Hinneker or Peterson? I don't see Cole.
Steve is here, but I'm going to abstain as the alternate on this committee. Thanks.
Okay. Tab Coordinator Koutsoukas.
Aye.
All right, Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Robbie. With that passing, next item on the agenda is public comment on committee business. Do we have anybody lined up, Robbie?
No, we do not have anybody for public comment this morning, Chair.
All right, thank you. We will move on then to the TAB report. So I'll turn it over to Elaine.
Thank you, Chair. TAB met yesterday afternoon. For the Chair's report, Chair Hovland reported that the legislature did not propose any changes for metropolitan governance. It is also Police Recognition Week. And then he also recognized Peter Dugan, who had been named for the 2023 Minnesota Recreation and Parks Association Board and Commissioner Award recipient. For the MnDOT report, Connie Siebjam reported that construction season has started and wants assistance in reminding the public that the work is being done for them and not to them. So he's asking for any entities to help with that message. There was no report for MPCA. For the Metropolitan Airports Commission, Carl Crimmins reported that Aer Lingus is flying 4 flights per week to Dublin, and Delta Airlines has added direct flights to Dublin also. Dublin is a hub for connecting international flights in Europe. Airline passengers are now exceeding 2019 passenger levels. There are more international flights, and Sun Country has expanded flights. The Metropolitan Council report, Deb Barber reported that the first quarter ridership was 12.5 million passengers, an increase of 15%. ABRT ridership is up 31%, and express ridership is up 16%. The last Transportation Policy Plan Advisory Work Group meeting will be on Friday and tomorrow. The Suburban Transit Association, Gary Hansen, reported that Maple Grove Transit MyRide microtransit service capacity and hours were expanded effective May 1st. Minnesota Valley Connect microtransit ridership is up 31% over a year ago, and its highest level ever. And there are plans to add zero-emission and autonomous vehicles to expand service further into Scott County in Prior Lake and Shakopee by late 2024, early 2025. And MBTA is also updating bus stop signs that will enable riders to get real-time information on routes via unique stop IDs or QR codes. For business items, TAB approved the program year extension for Washington County's CASA 17 and Minnesota 36 intersection improvement project. They approved release of the 2024-25 to 27 TIP amendment to add a regionally significant project expanding US 10. They approved the scope change request for Metro Transit's regional mobility hubs. There was quite a bit of discussion on this item, but they did approve as TAC had recommended. They approved a streamlined TIP amendment for 2 new projects, Minnesota 65 and the mill and overlay from Minnesota 316. There was a streamlined TIP amendment that came through TAC for 6 new NEVI projects. This was pulled off the consent agenda in order to amend one of the items for a total project cost, reducing it to $750,000 with a federal cost of $225,000, and then they approved the action transmittal. And then they approved release of the TIP for public comment, which is an action item for approval on this agenda. Yes. They also had updates on some information items. There was a regional solicitation evaluation updates. Chair Hovland reported on the policymaker work group for the regional solicitation evaluation. The meeting agenda covered a role of the working group, a history of the solicitation and the current process, an update on the peer review and listening sessions that are being conducted as part of the evaluation. The members offered potential questions to ask the peer agencies that are being used in the analysis. They had a discussion on regional solicitation evaluation goals, and members emphasized the need to coordinate with the updated transportation policy plan and 2050 regional development guide as they're developed. And other suggestions and questions to be considered are the solicitation should express a clear intent on where to spend money and why it's important to fund. The solicitation should clearly explain why certain data points are critical for application for performance, and make sure that all metrics are valuable and help achieve the goal. Glenn Johnson reported on the active transportation work group. The workshop has met 4 times, or the work group has met 4 times. With the feedback they received from TAB, they left the recommendation that spending $15 million of active transportation funding with this project selection. The group discussed what geographic equity looks like. They reviewed the maps of where projects are located that are proposed to receive active transportation funding. Minneapolis had 4 projects qualifying for the active transportation funding and volunteered that 2 receive federal funding to provide that more entities receives active transportation funding for the pilot projects. The work group will also be talking about requirements of the legislation, especially the complete streets requirement, as not all current regional solicitation applicants have streets. TAC recommends that they consider more than 15 million, so they will be bringing that up for discussion again. And work going forward, we'll be discussing on a potential 2025 application and also going into the 2026 solicitation. And the group will be reviewing the MnDOT applications. For the regionals, there was information on the regional solicitation scenarios for 2024. Steve Peterson presented information on the 3 funding scenarios and requested feedback. Hennepin County noted that there was not much deviation for the safety scenario versus the midpoint scenario, and that also more over-programming funding had been added to more trail projects versus pedestrian and safe routes to school projects. And then they ran out of time, so they did not cover the transportation funding overview or the scope change policy update. That's the information I have.
Thank you, Elaine. Any questions for Elaine? All right, seeing none, we will move on. Thanks again, Elaine. So today we only have one business item, and that's the adoption of the draft 25 through 28 TIP, pending public comment. Turn this over to Joe.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. The TIP annual cycle is beginning, and well, it's beginning. It began quite a while ago for some of us. And so we're here to recommend approval of the TIP. I don't have as much of a dog and pony show as most years for various reasons, you know, and it should enable you to have a very robust discussion in our important info item. But so stop me if you have any questions about the TIP itself or about this TIP or about the process. But I'll say a little bit about it. That for those of you who might be newer, this is something that we do every year, and to say that every federally funded project needs to be in the TIP, which then once we approve a TIP is reflected in the State Transportation Improvement Program, and that's where a project needs to be in order to get federal funding. And so in this case, we have a TIP that pretty much looks like TIPs in previous years. We have about $6.4 billion in the TIP, just over half, or no, not half, but just over the plurality, about 46% of that is for transit funds due to mostly some of those larger ABRT type of projects, with highway at 43%, and then bike ped, set asides, TDM, things like that make up the rest of it. So it's about $6.4 billion. Yesterday, the Funding and Programming Committee released the TIP for public comment. There's a 45-day public comment period starting tomorrow. And we'll be gathering feedback about the impact of the TIP and other things with members of the public and or some of yourselves perhaps that want to participate in that. And the TAB will approve, or they will not. They will recommend approval to the council at its August meeting. The council will approve the TIP in September, and then it goes through federal review, and it usually gets approved about November 1st. Some of you are impacted by the timing of that and may have TIP amendment needs or whatever as your projects move through, as this TIP gets a little bit delayed because it is for fiscal year 25 through 28. That does start July 1st, so there is about a 4-month period of time where the 2024 through 27 TIP is in effect, despite the fact that it is fiscal year 2028. That's really about all I have. If you have any questions about the TIP or the process, let me know. Otherwise, feel free to contact me in the future.
All right, thank you, Joe. So today the recommended motion is that our committee recommend that TAC recommend adoption of the TIP. So we'll need a motion and a second on this item.
Coster, motion to approve.
All right, thanks, Nathan. Do we have a second?
Walsh, second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Chair, this is Jason from Hennepin.
Yeah.
Just a question. Haven't had a chance to read through the tip yet. I know it's a good read and I'll be sure to take time to do so, but just had a question regarding earmarks or congressionally directed spending and how those are captured in this document, since they're kind of relatively new and have returned to the region and they're somewhat difficult to track on the interwebs. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jason. I will turn that maybe over to Joe or Steve.
I'll start. I probably know more about the tip itself and where things go. Steve might know more about the projects than I do. So it depends on funding source. So for those of you who would be interested in reading such things, we do have we have all the projects listed in appendices starting at about 50 pages in, and the first one is the first table we have is CMAQ, and they go through some of the other funding sources, and there's a table called, and I don't remember it offhand, so I'm going to find it. I believe it's called Demo, which also stands for High Priority Projects, and that's where some of those can be found. Unfortunately, there isn't necessarily a page specifically called earmarks or anything like that. But a lot of the projects in the Demo High Priority, those are usually congressionally congressionally funded. So that starts on page 828 or page 76 of the PDF that's attached. Steve, I don't know if you or anybody else from our staff has anything to add. Colleen has her hand up, I see.
Yeah, Colleen, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So with all the congressional legislative awarded projects, I went through the list and I contacted the agencies. I assigned SP numbers, I put in descriptions and put in the current costs that they had available. So they should all be in there. If I missed one here or there, be sure to let me know that.
Okay, so they're in the tip. It's just a matter of finding them.
Right,
So,
I have a list if an agency is interested in, I could let them know what the SP number is and they could look it up. Could contact me for those. I do have a main list that I use for tracking.
all right, well, Jason's going to read through page by page, so I'm sure he'll figure it out.
Chair, that answers my curiosity question. Thank you.
And
All right.
I will add here, Chair, that we have these two projects that are local funding only because they're regionally significant. And that's a pretty unusual thing for us. So I had to create a brand new table for it. But usually they're all federal, but that is a possibility to have local funding only.
All right, thank you. Good question, Jason. Any other questions before we take a vote on this item? All right, seeing none, I will turn it over to Robbie to take the votes.
Thank you, Chair. Anoka County, OJ.
Aye.
Carver County, Mielke.
Aye.
Dakota County. Hennepin County, Piper.
Aye.
Scott County. Washington County, Dahlheimer.
Aye.
Bloomington, Kiel. Eden Prairie, Ellis. Ridley, Kozlucher.
Aye.
Lakeville, Omi.
Aye.
Minneapolis Engineering, Coster.
Aye.
Plymouth, Chair Thompson.
Aye.
St. Paul Engineering, Weber. Metro Transit, Genowiak.
Aye.
Suburban Transit, Scholl.
Aye.
DNR Spooner Walsh.
Aye.
MnDOT Bike Ped Samuelson.
Aye.
MnDOT Metro District Carr.
Aye.
I saw Jody Carr. Yeah. MnDOT State Aid Brown.
Aye.
MPCA Dickerson.
Aye.
Council MTS Hineker. Peterson.
Aye.
Thank you. Tab Coordinator Kutsukos.
Aye.
Chair, the motion passes.
All right, thank you, Robbie. And then lastly on our agenda is informational item, and that is the regional solicitation funding options. So I will turn it over to Steve Peterson.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Got a lot of time on our hands here. We don't have to take it all either, but Robbie, maybe I'll lean on you to maybe share the PowerPoint first.
Sure. Share the slides.
So today will be the last time this will be an information item for you. Next month in June, this will come before you as an action item. Today, I think the goal today is to make sure everyone understands how much money is available, where it's going, the scenarios that are on the table at the moment, and any other technical feedback that you'd like to provide to TAB would be kind of what I would call the goals for today. So next slide. So we've put together 3 different scenarios, 1, 2, and 3. And let's see, we did do this presentation at TAC. So TAC was the first one to see all $263 million shown in the 3 scenarios. And then we did show at the tab here yesterday and go through it. So the first one's called midpoint. We distribute to the midpoint. Again, we don't have enough to get 30% to transit given the projects available. We'll talk about that a little bit. Number 2 is midpoint safety, and that selects 1 additional roadway reconstruction project based on the crash benefits of said project. So look at the next projects on the list. And then the last one is bike ped heavy. So that shifts about $15 million additional to the bike ped area. So on all 3 of these scenarios, federal funding is about $247 million. And the difference is about 4 to 6 projects is the primary difference between these 3 options that have been put on the table. Then, based on direction from TAB, we also did add in $15 million of active transportation funding. And again, that's not part of the modal funding mix. That's the regional sales tax money that's over and above the federal dollars. So we added it all up in $263 million. So next slide. Last time we had $355 million. So even though it seems like a lot, the last cycle we actually had over about $100 million more. So a few things to note, and some of this is just for reference for you, but we talked about the transit projects, and in one scenario we funded every transit project, and the other 2 we did shift that money either to roadways or bike ped. We're currently showing 10% over programming, about $12.5 million per year. And then we've tried to lay out what the different colors are. So from last time you saw this, we started with $200 million last time, the base funding. And since then we've added in active transportation, carbon reduction, protect, and that 10% of over programming. At TAC, we had a long discussion on active transportation because the work group for active transportation wanted TAC's technical input as to the methodology and how we distributed that money in the scenarios, and we'll talk about that. But once we bring up the slides, but in total, the pilot project, as shown right now, is 14 projects. 13 of those will go to cities, one of them to a county, Dakota County that is, and that represents 6 of the 7 counties. So those are some of the questions, like, oh, who's getting, like, who would get what in this pilot project, because you want to have kind of a range of community types and projects in there. So that's the results as they sit today. And then lastly, we do not have the results for HSIP yet, the scoring committee, and I think Jerry, you might have been on that one too. Met yesterday here, and so as soon as those are finalized, we'll look at those 2 lists and kind of look at both the geographic balance of where those projects are, but also see if there's any potential overlap of projects. And we have a couple that we're looking at right now, and that may result in some changes to the list. So next slide. Because you can't win both. The reason being is you can't win both HSIP and regional solicitation in the same cycle for the same project. So when we met with TAC earlier this month, and several of you were at that in-person meeting that we had at the council, again, the discussion was mostly on active. We went through all the details, but we did focus perhaps the discussion on active transportation, and probably 60 or 90 minutes. And this isn't all the conversation, but just try to bullet point a few of the key points. The TAC members said, we're asking about how we would manage those grants. So again, instead of state aid managing all those grants, because it's non-federal funds, the Met Council is going to be managing those funds, which is why we need a pilot project to kind of work out the details on how we would do that, and the people and the processes, versus state aid, who has it quite streamlined as far as how they do it. So we heard from the members a simple grants management process. We heard both at TAC, and then I'll expand that to TAB too, that there was more interest in either shifting what's going into the bike ped lists or going further down those lists. And I'll just say there's a range of ways you could go further down those bike ped lists. You could do a little bit more active transportation dollars into the pilot. You could overprogram by a little bit more. You could change how much we're funding between the categories, or you could shift money between the modes. So there's lots of ways to maybe get there if that's what TAB wants to do. And those are just a few of the ideas, or possible ways to get there. Some people wanted to expand this pilot for active transportation, others did not. So I'll say that was a mixed bag, and we're going back to the active transportation work group to ask them that very question. And then maybe lastly on this slide, the last bullet point, members asked, moving forward for active transportation, for a simple application process. And the thought there was, one, it could remove a potential barrier for especially cities to apply, because there's non-federal funds, and that may help with the geographic balance spreading out of those active transportation dollars. So maybe before I go on, Mr. Chair here, you were at that TAC meeting. Anything else you want to add just from your perspective?
No, Steve, I think you did a good job covering that. Nothing to add.
Okay. Then so maybe the last thing to bring up, and Elaine touched on this a little bit, we did have a discussion with TAB yesterday. I'll say we didn't get any concrete feedback. We asked them, do you want different scenarios? What are you kind of feeling about the scenarios? And I wouldn't say we got any clear direction. We got comments from a few of the members, particularly a couple of the counties, on some of their preferences, but I don't think TAB gave us any direction like, okay, cut a scenario or add a scenario. But there were a few people that made comments on getting some more bike ped projects and how we might do that. So next slide. I think that's it. So let's now jump over to the other attachment here, Robbie.
Okay. WebEx has changed things.
I noticed that, yes.
And now I have to figure out how to stop sharing because I don't have my,
Let's see here.
there we go. Okay.
And if you just zoom in a little bit on that attachment, people at home can open it for themselves here too, but just to kind of follow along. So Joe put together a nice information item here that detailed all the colors and the shifts. And again, there's only about 4 to 6 projects that are different between the scenarios. And we tried to highlight what those specific projects were at the end of this first page and the beginning of the second page. So, and once we get into the tables, I'll just kind of specifically show you what those are. But if you could slide down a little bit, and then widen it out. We'll go through each of these application categories here. And so since this went to TAC, we also did add some maps and some other geographic balance tables. So people that heard this at TAC, there's some additional information which I think was some good context as to where the projects are, and even some of the maps highlight where the active transportation projects are. So that was one thing that was requested of us. So as we get into the tables here, I'm gonna do the same on my other screen. It's like, maybe can you zoom in a little bit more? Yeah, even more. Yeah, well, I got one.
More?
That's probably good. That's probably good. You just scroll to the left a little bit. Okay, good. So just like last year, we do denote projects that had a safety high score, either for crashes, Montana's crash benefit, pedestrian safety, or equity bonus projects, and that's just to the right of the applicant. And in each of the categories. So the first, we'll just kind of go through these quickly. So again, the first column is the base funding. That was the $200 million. That's not a scenario. So we'll, after today's meeting, we'll likely hide that column, but it's just for you to see the progression of adding in the more money and where it went to. So in traffic management technologies, 2 projects submitted, and we're showing funding in all 3 scenarios for both projects. So that one was pretty straightforward, not very high dollar amounts there. Next, spot mobility and safety. Here's a little bit of deviation. So the first scenarios 1 and 2 are funding all the way down to project 9. So we're getting most of those, they're primarily roundabout projects actually. And reaching down to get one for Washington County at number 9 here is if you look in the geographic balance tables, you'll notice that's maybe a geographic balance deficiency. So we're reaching down to get that Washington County project, and then in the bike ped heavy, you lose that project number 9. So one spot mobility project would be the trade-off there for some additional bike ped projects. So scrolling down, oh yeah, right there. Strategic capacity, we had 6 projects submitted. This was where we put the orange, you can see in orange there is the protect funding. That Highway 13 project submitted by the city of Burnsville had the most amount of eligible protect elements in it. So we thought that was a good place to put protect. And we kept that consistent across all of the scenarios. And you'll see that we did this for carbon reduction. We did that same approach. So lots of decision making in there, but we tried to simplify it, and I'll show you that in roadway reconstruction. So scroll down a little bit. So roadway reconstruction had the most projects submitted in the roadways category, and each of the scenarios is a little bit different for how many projects we get. The midpoint, you'll see the green is a new color that's jumps onto the scene, and that's carbon reduction funding. So the Cedar Avenue project here shown at number 9, traffic calming project, Cedar Avenue just south of downtown area, would be eligible for carbon reduction funds based on the project type. So we do have projects in each of the modal areas for carbon reduction. So in midpoint, the number one scenario, we get all the way down to number 10 in reconstruction. In the safety, we get one more project. So we had, that's one of the main differences in roadways between number 1 and number 2. In number 2, you get the 11th ranked Hennepin County project on Marshall Street. And the reason we went there with the remaining dollars was because of the next projects on each of these lists, with the available funds left over, that one had the highest crash reduction benefits. So that was the decision making there to show the difference. And again, it's not a huge deviation between number 1 and number 2, just to let you know. But then in bike bed heavy, you go back up to project number 9. So compared to number 2, you lose 2 reconstruction projects. Compared to number 1, you lose 1 reconstruction project if you want to go bike bed heavy. Okay, scrolling down lastly to the bridges. The target for bridges was $10 million as shown in the application approved by TAB. And that puts us in between funding 1 and 2 projects. And we're showing fully funding all 2 projects, which would be just under $12 million going to bridges. So it would meet that intent of the $10 million target. Okay, and moving on now to transit. So in the 2 competitive categories, well, I'll say that with transit expansion and transit modernization, again, 30% of the total funds, $247 million, there's not enough project submittals to fund 30% of $247 million. In the midpoint, number 1 midpoint scenario, we're showing funding every project in transit expansion, modernization, and we even dipped down into travel demand management and funded every project there further down on that page. So that's, we felt like that was the truest essence of midpoint, was to fund every transit project and TDM project that we could, because that's where that would be, the true midpoint. Even in doing so, we still need to shift $7 million elsewhere. So I'll just make that point. Scenario number 2 forgoes funding the lowest scoring transit expansion project and the lowest scoring transit modernization project, and shifts, and that's for the safety one. So that gets shifted mostly to that roadway reconstruction project in the safety theme. Again, the other things on this page are the ABRT, which is the H line, $25 million, and the TMO and TDM set asides for the future there. And then number 2 and number 3 are the same. They forego that funding, but in number 3, the money gets shifted to bike ped as opposed to roadways. So that's the difference. That the transit money that can't be used or isn't spent gets shifted to bike ped in number 3. In number 2, mostly shifted to the roadways. And then below the blue colored is money that was set aside last cycle. Again, that's $1.2 million. And that's going to travel demand management projects. And the money would be for 2026 and 2027 program years, because those TDM projects don't need the 4 to 5 years lead time like some of the other capital projects. Okay, now on to trails, and then we'll open up for questions here. And so you have to put your thinking cap on for this one here. So this is where we start sprinkling in the active transportation dollars. So what we heard from the active transportation work group and what they presented to TAB and gave us a general direction on was to use about $15 million for a pilot, put that on projects that could start construction by the end of calendar year 2026 requested $2 million or less of federal funds and could meet all of the statutory requirements. There's 7 statutory requirements. So we went back out to eligible applicants and asked them, could you meet, we know what your request was, but could you meet that construction by the end of 2026, start construction? And could you meet, we had to ask them 2 additional questions. Are you in a non-motorized system plan? And do you have any complete streets policies or strategies that your local community has used or are on the books? The other thing we did in developing this is we gave preference to higher scoring projects. So instead of putting all the active transportation dollars at the end of these lists, we started at the top of the list and said there's an advantage to not having federal funds. And so projects that scored higher should have that advantage of being able to have the first crack at using or getting those active transportation dollar funds. So that's why you'll see it kind of sprinkled throughout versus all of the active transportation dollars at the end, because of these criteria that we put forth. And that's what we spend a lot of time with TAC. So in the multi-use trails, this is where we have 35 applications. So just like last time, a ton of applications, and this perhaps is the one application category where we're not getting as far down on those lists like we are in the other 11 or so application categories. Part of the reason why that is because many of the high scoring projects in multi-use trails requested at or near that $5.5 million maximum. So even though the bulk of the federal bike ped money is going to this category, you still cannot fund many projects because a few projects are taking a lot of the money basically at the top of these lists, which is good projects, follow the rules, but that's just the nature of funding larger trail projects compared to safe routes to school or pedestrian. You'll see on the bike ped heavy scenario number 3 on multi-use trails here, we do get an additional 4 projects funded in multi-use trails, and this is where at the staff level we thought it'd be appropriate to put that additional 15 up to this $15 million that shifted in the bike ped heavy scenario. We did have some comments at TAC about could we put it on the other ones, and the answer is yes, you could. Certainly could have, but long list. So this was a chance where we had a chunk of money to kind of eat away at a few more projects here. Okay, next page there, Robbie. Okay, again here, this because now we're on pedestrian facilities and safe routes to school. So you'll see more of the purple here, and that's the active transportation dollars at work, and that's because the maximum award for both pedestrian facilities and safe routes to school is $2 million and $1 million respectively. So they all meet at least that one of the thresholds that the work group had put forth of doing smaller projects. And you'll see the one difference here between the scenarios. We're funding most of the PED projects, so we're getting a ways down there. I think some people would like to go even further down that pedestrian list. And in the bike ped heavy scenario, we are getting one additional project. That would be project number 12 of 17 in the city of Bloomington. And otherwise, number 1 and number 2 scenarios are the same. And then lastly, safe routes to school, again, a mixture of the federal funds shown in yellow and the active transportation funds shown in purple. And we are getting, again, let's see, 8 out of 10 projects there. So funding most of the way down that list. Again, some comments that made, last 2 cycles, we funded all of those projects, safe routes to school. So again, with either a little bit more over programming, a little bit more active transportation dollars, shifting of money within application modal areas or from another modal area, all those things could get more projects if that's the way TAC wants to go. So then just Oh yeah, can't forget about unique projects. Next page here. You may not have seen this yet, and so again, TAB served as the scoring body for the unique projects, and in total we had set aside $4.5 million last cycle for these projects between the unique projects and then the travel behavior inventory. And so you can see we're able to fund the top 3 ranking unique projects. St. Paul EV Car Share, Washington County Gold Line EV Car Share, Minneapolis A-Ramp Mobility Hub. Next slide. So here's the summary tables where we show all the funding that is available by funding source. So I think Lyndon had requested some of this information, so we did expand it from what TAC saw, but it's largely the same. And then we do go through what this would mean from a modal balance perspective for each of the scenarios. The far left column excludes active transportation, and the far right column, because we knew we'd be asked to do this anyway, includes active transportation. So what if you do kind of all the dollars in, what would it look like? Then the last few slides are maps showing the location of projects. Again, since most of the projects in each of the scenarios are the same, it's a little tough to kind of discern the differences here between the 3 maps, but it does give you a general sense for where the projects are in the region. And then the last slide, another kind of good technical slide they may be interested in, is geographic balance. We looked at that both for this cycle, but more importantly, we looked all the way back to 2014 and did a summation by county relative to population and jobs throughout the region. So some other interesting information, I'll say, that I'll give credit to Robbie on putting that one together. So Mr. Chair, I think with that, I'll turn it back to you. And again, we're looking for any technical comments, general impressions, or questions that you may have on the 3 funding scenarios that we've put together. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. Very good presentation, a lot of good information in there. And I will turn it back to the committee to see if there's any comments or questions or thoughts on these different scenarios.
Chair Darren Melke, if I could.
Yeah, go for it, Darren.
Question for Steve for the active transportation funding amount. Is it 15 million that you're setting aside or incorporating into your scenario?
Yeah, I think to date we've done just over, I think it's about 15.8 million is what we have in there at the moment. We're generating $24 million per year starting last October 1st is when that sales tax, as you know, you're getting some of that too, the counties are, and transit providers. But back on October 1st, and the projection was $24 million per year. So we've put in at this point $15.8 million.
Okay, and maybe a second question at the 15.8 million, is that just to allocate this first year of that funding just to get some of these projects going, and then you'll start up this separate solicitation process? Is that correct?
Yeah, the main impetus for doing it, thank you, Mr. Chair and Darren. So the main impetus in doing this, we're calling it a grants management pilot project, is because state aid's not managing the federal funds. So we need to set up the procurement, legal, oversight processes at the Met Council to be able to manage those projects. And what we didn't want to happen was for us still to be able to manage the projects, but we do a solicitation, say in 2 or 3 years, and it's $100 million that we built up in the bank.
Yep.
And it's like, oh geez, we got 100 projects to manage, and we just needed some small number of projects to get going on pilot. And so there's no magic number that's the right amount, or it should be more or less, but something in that where we are give or take a few projects is probably the right amount for us to kind of have some learnings. And then the question that we're going back to the active transportation work group with the next meeting, they're starting to think about, should we do a separate solicitation in 2025 just for active transportation? That would probably be on the order of magnitude of maybe 50 million or so dollars. Or do you want to see what we could learn here and then do something probably in 2026? Could be with the solicitation. The federal funds could be separate. But that's the question that we're starting to pose to that active transportation work group is, do you want to do a special solicitation next time, or do you want to wait, do something in 2026 that probably would be even more, add another 25 million or probably on there, might be 75 million or more.
Okay, yeah, I think you partially answered my next question. I was just wondering if we could up that or adjust that amount upward to get you to the point where you'd have this new solicitation process in place, at least then you could start fresh with that new process. But so 15.8 is just a number you guys came up with, but that could be adjusted up or I guess down too if you wanted.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It's not a magic number. We just wanted something less than 100 projects to manage for a pilot.
Okay. Yeah, I guess talking with Lyndon, I think we probably would support whatever you guys would recommend, or we could even go higher, I guess, just to get more of those pedestrian or trail projects going sooner, just to get that money out there.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. So several people here are on that active transportation work group. So I think any feedback that, Michael Thompson as the chair, and then let's see, who else we have? Craig Jensen, Jordan Kozak from Hennepin County. It might be it from this group here, but anything we hear today, well, those three at least will, or two people will bring it back to that work group. Paul attends those as well.
I can opine, but Maddie, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I actually have kind of like a counterpoint to Darren's last comment there about potentially adding more to the active transportation or adding more active transportation dollars to this regional solicitation scenario exercise. And we kind of thought about it differently. I know our commissioner spoke up at TAB yesterday about how we had only a single city apply for any projects. And I know we've kind of voiced this opinion before, or the comment before, that, the regional solicitation application process is not easy, right? You have to have a certain amount of resources, either staff time or consulting funds, to be able to even apply. So I know we have some hesitation about saying, let's just go ahead and add more active transportation funds to this to get more bike and ped projects over, having that active transportation work group explore how can we, do 15 million now, but do something different in 2025, do like a pilot 2.0 of some separate solicitation, so that there are maybe communities that have great bike and ped projects but weren't able to apply for this regional solicitation, or like aren't able to go through this process. Then that kind of gives them an avenue to get some of their projects funded as well, which might change this map, right? If we were to combine these maps, Steve, that you put together for the distribution, if we added, whatever that 2025 solicitation looks like, that might change how that looks, because there may be smaller communities that can get in the game at that point.
Yeah. Good counterpoint, Maddie. Appreciate that information. And then we'll go to Cole, and we can go back to Darren if he has any response. Cole,
yeah, and this, I think it's against the rules, but I'm just going to link to the last solicitation action item for reference for folks. A couple of data points that we provided last time, I just want to hear the reaction of the group. There was a request to provide the percentage of the high score for each application, and we're going pretty far down these lists this time. It might just be a helpful thing to provide since we did it last time. The other table in the action item that I was looking at, and Steve, you probably were the one that worked the most on it, was table 1, which was key differences between the funding options, and it had sort of number of applications funded. And I'm just wondering if that similar table could be produced and maybe adding in there like percentage of the funding requested in each category type that is proposed to be funded under these scenarios. I think it looks pretty similar to that table 1. I'm just curious if you've worked on that yet, or if that's something that could still be developed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Cole. Good points. I think our intent now that TAB seemed fairly comfortable with the 3 funding scenarios we put together, or some combination of what we have. So I think now would probably be a good time before we get back to TAB to put together this next table. And we can include, let's see, did we have in there last time % of total requests by mode? I getting lost on the table a little bit here, but if not, we can put it in there.
Yeah, and just for the committee's sake, I ran some numbers off to the side here. The midpoint funds about 70% of the roadway request, 100% of the transit request, and about 35% of the bike ped requests in terms of total funding. So I think that's just helpful for them to understand. Like they tend to look at this from a how far are we going down the list. I had one other point though, and maybe a question again back to you, Steve, is the scenarios, midpoint safety and bike ped heavy have transit at below the 25% modal range. And I'm just curious if we've ever gone below the modal range. I know we went slightly above for bike ped last year, I believe, last cycle. But have we ever gone below the modal range, even if it only equates to less than 1%, which is still about $1 million. But do you know if we've ever done that?
Oh, I don't. Maybe Robbie, can you pull up? Let's see. I think that's right after unique projects is all the summary tables. Let's just maybe look closer at what he's talking about here. Yeah, zoom in.
So on scenarios 2 and 3, transit's at 24.6 and 24.8, and the modal range is actually 25 to 35, correct?
Yeah, so you're talking about transit. So transit at 25 to 35. So the midpoint there is 30%. And so you're saying we're just below the the low end of the transit modal funding range for both number 2 and number 3. And even though it's maybe a percent or less of $250 million is something, it's not nothing.
Yeah, I mean, and last time we did it, it was a bike ped heavy scenario that we funded that brought them over the top of the modal range.
Yeah.
And I think TAB should just be aware that it's almost like a transit light, because if you're going below the modal range, that should almost be emphasized to them, because they've never done that before in any category. So the other option is maybe to fund one more project with over programming just to put it over that minimum, because I think there's another $2 million project or so, and would just be curious to hear if others have thoughts on that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, maybe to answer your original question, or the original question from Cole, I don't think we've ever gone below the low point of the modal funding range. So I see the point he's making here. And even though it's maybe small, I think TAB would either have to kind of say, yeah, that's okay that we're doing that given the circumstances here, or let's see, like 1 more percent. So it's probably one more project kind of gets you over the low end of that range, I'm guessing. Cole, if you've already done the math, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's about $1 million under midpoint safety, so it's more like 500,000 under bike ped heavy, but yeah,
Okay.
and there's $2 million unfunded projects, so it's not a huge, it's not like we have to add a $10 or $7 million project.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, probably, say if TAB wants to do that, the easiest way is, we left a little bit of runway there on the over programming. I'm guessing if that would be a fair question to ask. Do you want to fund probably one of the two remaining, both MVTA looks like, one of the two remaining MVTA projects with a little over programming to kind of make sure transit's still within that range that TAB established. I think would be the question we'd pose, but curious to see if others think the same thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, Cole.
Yeah.
To at least explain that to TAB. And then, since they're both MBTA projects, maybe have a conversation with them beforehand on if there was momentum for input safety or bike money towards that, they would have a projects.
Yeah, I can tell you, Mr. Chair, there's definitely momentum on TAB from at least one member for one project over the other, but it's not from MVTA. So it would be good to check in with the applicant too. I think that's a good point.
This is Heidi, representing STA, but I do work for MVTA. I can definitely bring this back to the group if I do need to get their feedback. I am aware of the TAB discussion from yesterday too.
Good.
Okay. Great. Anything else, Cole?
No, thanks.
Besides assigning more work to Steve, that's always good.
Hey, he can always try to assign it to me if he wanted to. So.
That's good. Jason, you got something?
Yeah, Chair, just Hennepin County's perspective on Cole's observations. The modal funding ranges are kind of discussed, reviewed, and established by TAB. So I'm certainly supportive of presenting the situation to TAB, but as far as recommendation, I think I'd be silent on that, just recognizing, this is specifically TAB's role to establish those and then also determine if we can exceed them or, in this case, be below that minimum.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think Steve would present it in such a way that hey, it's an option and something for consideration, because I know they like the more information, the better for them. If you don't have the right information, you're going to have to get it to them at some point. I think staff will take note of that comment. Thank you, Jason. And then Jerry Oj, Anoka County.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I have a question. Maybe this was covered and I might have missed it, but say for instance, on the Safe Routes to School funding scenario, the top two projects there qualified for federal funding, but swapping it out for the active transportation funds. And again, I'm not trying to pick on, say, like South St. Paul, but with the active transportation funds, can that applicant then come back and reapply for federal funds at a future date and receive federal funds potentially through this solicitation process? Because their match is about 4.3 million. So they could request another $1 million in federal funds.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Jerry, that's a fair question that I imagine the active transportation work group is going to have to work through. And Mr. Chair, you've been on the statewide active transportation group, and in some cases there they do allow match. If someone has won a federal award, they allow those funds to be used as the match to other federal funds, if I have my story straight. But so I think that's yet to be determined if you could do that. There's probably some other jockeying possibilities out there too about if someone gets federal funds, but then we've got a an active transportation solicitation next year. Would someone kind of drop? They win those, or are you going to drop the federal funds if there's not enough money for both type of deal? Because hey, why am I going to go through the federal process now? But so those are all the scenarios I think that group needs to work through. But good question.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Yeah, and I think that's partially maybe why the $15 million is what it is, or the 15.8 million is. First of all, applicants or potential applicants didn't know that the money would be available through the solicitation. And there's a lot of unknowns still, and also more money you put into the regional solicitation with that active transportation money, the more you're taking away from those smaller cities or the ones that we're trying to capture with those smaller dollar projects that maybe are intimidated or don't have the resources to apply through the regional solicitation process. But yeah, great question, Jerry. I think your question was somewhat answered. So you good with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Jerry. Steve, anything else on that?
I can add a little bit more on that too. That is part of what the active transportation work group and TAB will be looking at is what are the requirements for the funding. There has been mention in the past, some past discussions that the active transportation is supposed to fund new projects, additional projects, not replace funding for other projects that have already been funded. So if a project's already received some federal funding for the plus the local that's already designated, that they're not likely to want to swap out the funding because you're not getting more projects, you're just getting a replacement of funding. So I think, I would guess that TAB is going to probably look at that for future requirements, but it is one of the things that we'll be looking at.
Thank you, Elaine. All right, we have Nathan Koster up next.
Thanks, Chair. I don't think my camera's working with this new WebEx update. I don't know if people are having the same problems on their end, but it's not working. Cole made a few good points, so I just thought I'd like to echo some of those. I do think it would be helpful to have the % of total score on the applications. That was really helpful last time. And I do think this dovetails really well to his point about the midpoint ranges. I don't remember those being rules as more of like a guide of like historically where the funding levels are. And I think what that does is try to help understand like generally how the money is being allocated. And also how clarify if things are high or low. But the point of the regional solicitation is they're competitive based applications, and it varies year to year of like the strength of certain categories versus other categories. And I think that's good information to provide to the policymakers to kind of set that direction, similar to what Jason said is our goal as the technical people to like make sure that information is there for them to help make the decision. So I guess I'm a little neutral on the point of like the transit, if it should be high or low, but I think we should be able to be flexible based upon the applications that come in this year and not feel like we have to be like, yes, let's just fund it all for the sake of funding it all. Whereas other categories, whether it's bike, ped, roadway, or safe routes, if they're highly competitive, you have a lot of scores really bunched up, which is the case of what we're seeing this year. So I do echo a lot of those points that Cole brought up and thought it was really good to highlight those. The last point I'll make is I agree with Maddie and the point of the active transportation fund. I know we're all in the same boat that we weren't sure what the status of that was this year, but I think that definitely influenced who did apply and the barriers to apply, the cost to apply, and how it could have affected how that money is being distributed. And I would just say that I would caution us against using active transportation funds just as a sole purpose to try to reallocate money in the region and really focus on the intent of what the state legislature did last year to set up that money and get the money out the door. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nathan. All right, any other feedback for staff on these options, comments? Not seeing any more hands up here.
Mr. Chair, this is Cole. Maybe just one more point. I don't know if we pass this along to TAB or not, but I personally don't like the percentage of high score figure, but we provided it last time and Tab has asked for it. I always think as technical staff, we should advise them that comparing scores across the categories is not good. And I think we've done that in the past, and just kind of talking about that idea that they're compared to each other, not across the categories. So maybe just continuing to have technical staff, even if we provide more information, kind of caution it with that type of statement, that technical staff who work on these applications and score them recognize that it's not apples to apples to compare across funding categories.
Yeah, very true. In past years, projects that scored really high and made others in that same category look like the percentage of overall score are very low. And so it is hard to compare apples to apples across categories. So great point on that, Cole. And then we have Darren and then Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Part of this is just a follow-up. I guess we have no strong opinion on the active transportation funding. I think just be flexible, and if it helps to fund one additional project or take one away, doesn't really matter to us. I do have a question. If you can scroll up to the reconstruction category, it's related to a Carver County submitted project. I think Steve is probably a little aware. I'm going to try to keep this high level, not to confuse everyone. So it's the project, where is ours there? Number 10 on the list, which is in scenario 1 and 2 at this point. When Carver County submitted our funding application, we had a particular intersection signalized type. It was a newer style that we had done a lot of prior work on. We had a large corridor study. All of our project partners are in support of it at that time. And since our application, we've done additional work through preliminary design. And it came to a point where there was some concerns with that signaled intersection style design that we were working on. And we've since had to move to more of a traditional intersection style that would more than likely we would have probably applied in the expansion category and probably done fairly well based on our own internal scoring of that. I was just wondering if that's scenarios ever come up in the past where a project was submitted in one, and due to things that have occurred beyond our control, or applicant's control, I should say, have morphed it into another funding category.
Was that like a roundabout that has now moved to like a signalized intersection, Darren?
No, it was a displaced left signalized intersection, which we don't have in the state here. Okay. Utah, and I forget the other states that have them. So we did all of our due diligence, and we thought we had everyone on board, and we got more into the detailed design. We just had some fatal flaws that we couldn't get around with some of our stakeholders. So we had to revert to more of a traditional, I'll call it a traditional signalized big intersection that involves expansion on a secondary highway. Trunk Highway 41 is the one that needs to expand to accommodate a traditional signalized intersection. So we put it in modernization because we weren't really adding lanes with our scenario, just reconfiguring, and now it's morphed into more of a expansion project. And if we would have done this with our scoring, I think we would have ended up 4th in the capacity category. So I just wanted to throw out there if that situation has come up before.
I know projects have changed. You have to go through a change approval process, and if it's significantly different, there's a chance of losing all of your funding. But I don't recall, after the scoring has been done, where after the fact something is able to be shifted around. But Steve, I guess I'll ask staff what something similar happened.
Yeah, Calvary County Commissioner brought it up yesterday at TAB for those that were watching. too, and the MnDOT district engineer referred back to the scope change policy, which it's phased from what I'm hearing is what we would normally do. At some point, it is a new project and not just a change of scope. You know, a lot of people change the intersection type. That's pretty typical. You know, you're going to do a roundabout, it turns to a signal, or you've got a typical diamond interchange and then changes through the project development process. So it probably depends on the magnitude of the change. So we might maybe have to explore that a little bit more offline, whether it's kind of a new project or we just changing the intersection design, which would be our, in some cases, not even would be what Elaine and Joe and Colleen, an administrative change, and may or may not go through the scope change process depending on the kind of the size of the change. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but probably worthy of some more offline discussion.
Yeah, I agree, Steve. I have to talk through that more. I just want to make the committee aware of the situation that we're in. I guess we've tried it. Trunk Highway 41 is essentially expanding compared to what our application shows. It's a 4-lane highway to accept or accommodate the capacity needs at the intersection. That's what's changed, and so we're not. It's in that gray area, and we're just a little concerned that it could be interpreted as an expansion project or capacity enhancement project versus a modernization, and if there could be some consideration for when we actually vote on a scenario, just the consideration for what has transpired beyond our control, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like some more offline discussion with the TAB representative, the staff. But good luck with that. Hopefully it all works out. Wish you well.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? Let's see. Scott?
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I will kind of do my best to form some comments here that are admittedly kind of jumbled in my head. But I think it's a mashup of a few things we've already heard. I'll just start with, we're talking about shifting some transit money into different pots. And the thought, goes through my mind of, what are some potential unintended consequences of that in the near to medium term, for future solicitations. Transit should be a priority for the region. And I just wonder, what sort of message that might send in future solicitations if we shift money out of that modal kind of funding split. That kind of brings me to Cole's comment about going below the midpoint, dipping below the midpoint. And if we shift money out of transit, what does that say to the region? That also brings me to Maddie's comment, which might have kicked off this conversation. Granted, it was more focused on active transportation, but that basically, there are more projects out there than were submitted for the solicitation. And my mind just kind of goes to, I think the population of transit projects that could be submitted, is smaller than the actual sample of projects that were submitted to the solicitation for a variety of reasons. And so, while this cycle, we have fewer projects than there are dollars, I have some hesitancy to, reduce the funding even further, and shifting it to other modes, simply because, we don't know what the true population of projects could have been. Last comment is, and I think this kind of goes to staying true to modal funding splits in that midpoint, and at least communicating it to TAB is, at the end of the day, when we start shifting money around, I think these tables that are provided are great, and it helps me understand the situation clearly. it also kind of creates mini sub competitions between projects that, you know, I think are not those, that wasn't the spirit of, you know, the competitive grant, you know, where you create competition within modes. So we find ourselves maybe increasing the probability of having unexpected kind of wonky conversations about, you know, specific projects competing against one another. And should we fund, you know, a transit project versus a roadway project? But I don't have a formal position on any aspect, but just some thoughts to share from the macro level here at Metro Transit.
Thank you. Michael, you might be on mute here if you're trying to speak.
Thank you, Steve. I was speaking. Nobody can. Okay, hopefully you can hear me now. Yeah, one of the items I brought up at TAC was, this kind of goes back to Darren and Maddie's discussion about the pilot project and the $15 million. And something that I guess the policymakers will have to wrestle with is, you know, Met Council getting a large chunk of that new sales tax money. A pretty large portion is going directly to the metro counties, just through a formula process. So on the orders of tens of millions of dollars, and the cities are, you know, left out of that funding process. And so, you know, with the new active transportation money solicitation, you know, should there be a weight towards cities versus counties, since counties are already getting a large chunk of that money? And so there's a lot of things to wrestle with. So I know some of the cities just don't want to start giving all of that money away now, but rather, you know, let the process play out with the active transportation subcommittee and have them talk through some of those nuances. So just wanted to mention that I did bring that up at the TAC meeting. But again, that's not really for us to decide. It's more of the policymakers to decide that, you know, under, what do you call that, geographical equity or entity equity, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, how can we make that process fair, understanding the big picture with that new sales tax fund? All right, anything else from staff on this item or from the committee? All right, well, seeing none, Steve, I think you got some good feedback to take forward to the next step, and then pretty soon we'll have to start taking some action on these items. Yeah. In process, and it looks like Nathan, you might have a final comment here.
Yes, I did. If I missed this earlier, Chair, apologize, but because this is moving out to July or August for approvals, I think it would be helpful just to understand, like, those who would be in line for active transportation. Do we have a better understanding where TAB's gonna be like, all right, this is good, let's go? Because if this is gonna get into construction in like a year, and let's call it 1.5 years to 2 years, like, applicants need to know ASAP. Otherwise, this isn't going to happen. And I'm sure Met Council staff want to know that as well if you're going to be overseeing delivery. So I'm just curious if that's going to be a work group conversation or if there's a way to elevate that to get to yeses sooner. Because otherwise, like, this may not be successful in the pilot. I swear that's my last question.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Nathan. And I think that's really up for TAB to get this approved, right? The subcommittee has time to work through the process on what a future solicitation may look like. But Steve, you want to take that one?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair and Nathan. Great comments. We've heard that from others too. And our intent would be that the active transportation dollars that would be part of the approval that comes back to this committee in June and to TAB in July, mid-July. So I do not think there would be a delay beyond the, I think all this money would come through, including HSIP, all at the same time, July TAB meeting.
All right, thank you, Steve. Jerry, you had something?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Say one thing came to mind here too, is in regards to projects that scored, in pedestrian facilities or whatever for the federal. So they met the criteria for federal funding. But with the swapping out of active transportation funds, would these projects then be eligible for HSIP funding if those same applicants then applied for HSIP? Just kind of through this process, I guess I'm seeing a couple names here that were on both lists. I'm just wondering how is that going to work?
Great question, because we know the rules when it's federal money, but for this new pilot money,
Correct.
The gray areas. So, I'll let staff, if they want to jump in and discuss, but I don't think there's anything in the rules that say you can't specifically. But Steve, I don't want to speak out of turn.
Yeah, there's some future rule. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Jerry. There's some future rulemaking to be had, but at the moment, as you're saying there, we don't have that rule in place. So you're saying in the current HSIP solicitation, there may be one or more projects that could begin active transportation and HSIP. And could they use both of those funding sources or not? Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah.
Just put it out there. I don't need an answer, but it's.
Yeah. Well,
I can see it being a problem.
I could provide a response. Right now, the way the regional solicitation is set up, you can apply for HSIP and regional solicitation funding, but you only get funded with one. So TAB could probably make that determination. Does that carry over to any of the funding that's added in? Because currently it was only related to federal funding. You could get one or the other. And we do know there was some HSIP that overlapped with some of the roadway projects. We were just getting the preliminary scoring, so that will come back as an information item next month also. And we would contact those applicants for their preference of which funding they would like to receive.
Yeah.
But I wasn't aware there was some that was also active transportation, but we can take a look.
Yeah. From what I'm seeing on the list, there's a couple that I can see that scored for federal funds, but they actually have active transportation in your list. And then they potentially could have scored well on HSIP. So there might be a double dip kind of a scenario.
Yeah, we do compare the lists and then say, which one do you prefer? And I'm going to guess if they're active transportation, they would take that funding because that's zero. Oh, actually, with TABs, that's now again what TAB may decide. Does it equal the same match that the funding you would have normally gotten? So with the solicitation funding, it's still 20% local match, where if it was a replacement for a HSIP, would it be 90%? It's another wrinkle to.
Yeah, well, I think the applicant's going to say, I want both HSIP and the active transportation pilot money. And I don't know that there's anything in the rules that says you can't do that because it's not fully funded and they're still making their match on both. So the applicants that is part of regional solicitation that receive active transportation, that gives you a lot more flexibility, in my opinion, and it just depends on the decision makers and how they want to interpret their own rules. And again, it comes back to these nuances with the $15.8 million. There's a lot of outstanding questions that haven't been vetted, and so there's probably going to be a few people that are pissed off because maybe there was some double dipping, if you want to interpret it that way. But I mean, that's just the luck of the draw sometimes, in my opinion. So Jerry, you can you can join the audit team for the Met Council, and we can look at applicants are.
Thanks for volunteering me, Chair. But I'm gonna decline.
Thanks, Jerry. Good
Yeah.
question. I mean, I wouldn't even have thought of these unless you brought them up, but great question.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so it looks like the last hand was raised, so I think staff, you got enough information to take this to the next step. And we'll close it out from there unless staff has anything on this.
Nope, I'll just say I appreciate the discussion. A lot of good questions, and I think that's kind of exactly what's helpful to TAB is that we've dug into a few technical details, requested some more information that for some of the tables and such. So appreciate all the good thinking here today.
All right, thank you, Steve and staff for all your hard work on that, outlining those scenarios. Next item today is other business. Do any members have any other business or agency updates? All right. Seeing none, we will move towards adjournment at being 2:32. We are adjourned and appreciate everybody's time and input today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.